Hello, Andrew.
Hello, Kay. Good to be back.
It's good to be back with you as well. We are doing this waking up the tools conversation a little bit differently. We've decided for a variety of reasons to not do a LinkedIn Live during the month of May, but instead to have a conversation that's just been recorded. So that was why I greeted just you. And now we can say hello to everybody. Hello, viewers and
Hello,
friends.
everyone.
Yep, great to see you. Glad you're here with us. And what we do in these conversations each month is we pick a tool that comes from the coaching partnership that you and I had you were my coach as I was training to cross England on foot, as I did it, and then through the hijinks that ensued when I got back. And I was a different person attempting to, reintegrate into my life. And we I do think of it as co-created. Like we sort of dreamed up these tools that I put in the book. Here is the book. And there's a section at the beginning called Tools That Have Been Helpful for Me, and they are mindset tools. And we're taking one per month and having a conversation about it, inviting a little bit of homework for people who are watching. And yeah, I think that's where we are. Oh, and um, these are brought to you by Pathfinders. They're
Mm,
brought to the viewers by Pathfinders, right? Do you want to share a little bit about Pathfinders and
sure.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Pathfinders is well, it's part of my business, but it's basically a platform that we are inviting stories of people who are up to good in the world to share what they're doing and to learn more about their journeys and to make sure more people around the world know about people who are doing good work and that we hopefully inspire others to do the same. Because when you get to people's human story, you realize every person who's out there doing something meaningful and good in the world has had a very, you know, bumpy ride to get there. They've overcome a lot. They've usually had, some deep rooted reason that they're passionate about the thing that they're doing. And we really feel like, just in all the interviews that we've been doing, that every interview is another invitation to say, well, if that person can do it, like, why not me? And
Mm,
we just feel the world right now especially needs as many of those positive messages as we can find. And so our platform is just a place for that to happen.
wow, that's such a great description, such an inspiring, you know, um, vision. And uh, as a as a host for Pathfinders, as a podcast host, and as someone who has been interviewed and has a Pathfinder story, out in the world, um, I really feel that it's the it's the I think we can get disassociated maybe from like real people doing real things, and
Mm.
the idea of a place where you can go and get some inspiration. And if you feel that you're doing good in the world and would like to share about it and have that also be shared, and so that now
Mhm.
you're inspiring other people, like it's all of that, which is really, really fun.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. We hope so. And the evidence so far is proving that there's something to it. So we're excited about that. Yeah, and this show that we've done together is really, very aligned with our mission, which is to amplify the work of, people doing good in the world. And so, when the idea of doing the show came up, it was an of course for me, because this is amplifying your work, and it just happens
Mm,
that I happen to be part of that story. But if it had been somebody else, it would have been, yes, how can we support that?
mm.
Because that's what we're trying to do. So yeah, this series and all the other content that will be coming out through our members and the work that they're doing is our mission, which is to just, amplify, 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 so more and more people know about it and can feel inspired by it and hopefully take action to do something of their own.
Yeah. You know what? Even if the action is to sleep with a lighter heart that night,
Absolutely. Yeah.
And
And we need that right now, right? We need a balance of the urgency to do something in the world and the urgency, or whether it's politics or the environment or societal challenges. We need to balance that with some optimism and some hope.
Mhm.
One of my favorite podcasts is called Outrage and Optimism,
Mm.
and they tell a very balanced view of the same topic, basically. And they look at the big challenges that we're facing, and then they look at the people that are doing good things to try to overcome those challenges. And, I think that's the human history is like there's always been despair and suffering, and there's always been overcoming despair and suffering. And so
Mm.
what you give your attention to, I think, matters. And we want to make sure there's a place to go put your attention to things that are on the positive side of that ledger.
Hmm. Hmm. Well, the tool that we spoke about last time was the law of the universe, which is basically what you focus on grows. So
Mm-hmm.
choose carefully what you're focusing on. Um, this month, I decided that it's time to to go to the big meta behind them all tool, which actually
Okay.
comes up and has come up in every single one, and I'm sure will come up in the future ones and all. And that is, I am not my thoughts. I am not my thoughts. And I'll read a little bit from the book. There's just a short section on this particular tool. I am not my thoughts. Stay with me if this is new to you. I used to think that I was my thoughts, that I was my feelings, and that I was all of the talk ongoing inside myself. I now understand that just like I'm not my arms or legs or hair or fingernails, I'm not my thoughts. A great book, if you're curious about this concept, is Untethered Soul by Michael Singer. This one will come up again and again. So if it's murky right now, there's lots of opportunities in waking up for clarity with this tool. And please be patient if this is a new idea for you. It was many months of fits and starts before it clicked for me. And you look like you're remembering the many months of fits
A
and
flood of
starts.
memories, yes.
Yeah, so
Yes.
that's go ahead. Yeah, that's today's.
No, I was just going to say, I do recall that you were challenged to accept that simple little saying um, for quite a while,
Mm.
and but when you got to the other side of it, everything changed.
Yeah.
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 Yeah. I do want to say too, I love that, you talk about us co-creating these things. I would say what we co-created was how to implement this
Mm.
into your situation. We didn't co-create the tool. This tool has existed long before Michael Singer wrote a book. This is thousands of years of spiritual teachings have all said almost exactly the same thing in their own way.
Yeah.
Um, and it's just been repackaged and remarketed by other spiritual leaders all the way along. Michael Singer's book happened to show up in my life at a time when that was the message I needed to learn.
Mm.
And so now all I'm doing is sharing that with people who are at a point where it might be helpful for them as well.
I'm really glad you said that. Because in my mind, what we did was we sort of played games that made sense for my journey. Because you, as a coach, were sort of reflecting or being a mirror for me to envision my own growth and take the steps to bring it about. And so you're absolutely right. It's not that we created the tools, it's that we created I don't know, the bowling alley lane with the with the bumpers that would keep
Mhm.
me taking steps towards being able to utilize them. And
Right.
yeah, so that's what we co-created was the energy of that.
Mhm.
And like this one, well, I think I'm curious. Something that's been really interesting in these conversations has been like, I was the client at the time, and we're both coaches. And so, like, and then there was a point before, or perhaps you might not describe it this way, but it feels to me like there was a point before this tool made sense to you for you in your life. Like I think what I'm getting at is we're like everyone, we are both kind of on our journey of awareness, each of us. And I'd love to hear how, or was there a moment where do you have a moment of being like, oh yeah, that makes sense? Or even learning about this tool for the first time?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it actually, I think, yeah, and I might have spoke about this a little bit on one of our previous conversations, because as you said, this one definitely is intertwined into all the tools.
Mhm.
Yeah, like I had gone through some difficult family changes in terms of me moving away from where we were living, and moving and separating from my uh, girl's mom, and found myself in a new city. My sister took me in for a little while, which was helpful. Um, and I had a couple hours every morning before the parking law police would come and ticket your car. And so I think at 8 a.m. the cars had to be moved off the street. And so I used to get up at like 5 a.m. and go for a morning walk, and would spend a couple hours walking along the beachfront in Toronto. And when I started, I was not in a good place. I was quite angry about everything that had unfolded, and I think was finding blame. It was where most of my thoughts seemed to be focused, like whose fault is this, right? And I don't think I was the first. I was the last person that was going to be blamed at the time. And so I started just walking, and I started listening to podcasts, and this is 2014, I think. So there weren't a lot of podcasts at that time. There was sort of a newish thing. But there was one that was called The Wolf You Feed, I think, or something like that.
The
And
one
The
you
One
feed.
You Feed, yeah. And it was a simple little fable that they would tell this story at the start of every episode about, this young boy and his grandfather, and the story of two wolves, one who's full of evil and hatred and negative, and one who's full of love and, hope and possibility. And the young boy thinks for a few minutes and says, well, Grandpa, like, which one wins between these two wolves? And he says, well, the one you feed. And I remember, like, I literally probably heard that story 150 days in a row of walking every morning, and then listening to the episode where they talk to somebody about what that story meant to them, and how it might impact or be reflected in their own life story. So I started to kind of see how people were taking this simple little story about what you give attention to, and applying it to their own life, or relaying how it had impacted their own life. And I could start feeling like there was a little shift going on in me about, well, yeah, like if I stay in these thoughts while I'm walking about, blaming people and lashing out, in terms of my emotions and my thoughts, then that's the wolf that's going to keep winning here. And if I could start letting go of some of that, and looking at a different direction, at different thoughts, then maybe that would feel better, right? And so I started to notice that. And then after a little while, for some reason, I just remember walking one morning, and kind of being tired of having the noise in my ears of the podcast. I just kind of felt a little bit more at peace finally. And so I took the headphones out that morning, and I just walked. And what I noticed, and what I remember clearly, is that morning I noticed all the chatter that was going on in my own thoughts. And I remember noticing that, and this had obviously been ingrained by listening to the podcast, and sort of setting this up, but I noticed that I was noticing my thoughts. And then literally maybe within a week of that, Michael Singer's Untethered Soul book showed up in my life somehow. And it explained that the fact that I was noticing my thoughts meant I couldn't be those thoughts. Those thoughts couldn't be who I am because I'm actually able to see them. I'm actually, they're just like the sign on the side of the road or the house down the street. Like they're separate from me.
Wow.
And we've all had this experience. So, you and I, but everybody listening to this has had this experience where we can notice this thought pattern that we're having. And for some reason, I know I've said this before, I just decided like, wow, if I know that, then I don't need to actually be guided or be on this sort of autopilot of living with those thoughts as if they are my operating system. Like they're not. They're just these things separate from me that lots of us have had the impulse to do something or have had a thought of doing something and not done it.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, oh, well, if that's true, then why could that not be true for every single thought through the day? And so the Michael Singer book, The Untethered Soul, really helped shape that in a really simple language that, and the line that you've quoted of, we are not our thoughts, we're the ones noticing them, the observer of them, really gives you the power to say, okay, so those thoughts are going to happen. The more we learn to notice them, either when they're as we're having them or when we notice that we've had them because we're feeling a certain way. Sometimes that's the indicator that we're having a thought, is that the thought has already created an emotion in us. And we can say, oh, that's interesting. What's the thought behind that that's creating this? When we can get to that point, then we can say, well, that's not really serving me right now, or this is exactly the thought that I want to be in, and this is exactly the direction I want to take. So that was a huge shift for me. That sort of last quarter or last third of that year of healing the trauma that I was feeling in myself, just by learning where it was coming from, and that I just didn't, nobody had ever explained to me that that was not real. All of that thought and all of that feeling, that was just, I was just not conscious that it was happening. So that's why it seemed real. And as soon as I became conscious that it was happening, then I had separation from it and could choose my own path. Yeah. And then the last thing I'd say is, because a lot of people know this at some level, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I think what was interesting in our experience together, and we can get into this a little more, but was I, for some reason, just bought into this like on the spot. I was just like, this makes me feel a lot better. Like I feel like I'm empowered to feel good every day, even if there are negative thoughts or negative inputs likely going to happen. I now know that I don't have to do anything about them, and I can just sort of stay on this calm and sort of level-headed place. And that just felt amazing to me. And I was like, that's my new rule. I'm going to live by that thing. And I think I've said to you before, it's like my operating system got an upgrade, and I was just like, okay, I'm good with this. This is better. This is my new normal. And off I've gone, to be honest, since then. There are still tests of it, but I don't need to be convinced that this is the truth about what the human experience is, that we are conscious beings having this experience. And the experience is one that we are shaping by the thoughts that we choose to give our attention to. And what we do, how we react, the energy we put out into the world is all based on what we're giving our attention to and the energy that comes from. And to know that that's a choice, a conscious choice, is a pretty powerful thing when you go all in and just accept that.
Yeah. Oh, I think it's really interesting. And I know I have heard that before. You have said that before, that
Mm.
you just were able to go flick. I've turned the switch. I now understand this, because that was not how it happened for me at all.
No.
So I was curious if you would take us into what you remember about that from your perspective.
Yeah, well, it's funny because I remember the exact moment when this tool became the tool that needed to be brought forward. Because I remember saying to you something to the effect that I've never met somebody that has so much like negative and challenging stuff going on in their life. Like I don't like, it just feels like every day is just like there's like tears or trauma or frustration or challenge. Like it's like, how does all of that negative stuff happen just to you? Because I've never met somebody that it happens in such volume with, right? And I
Hmm.
remember like that was like the observation I had. And I think I might have even said that to you. And then I thought, well, that probably is uh, the experience you're having of life. It's not the reality that you're having of life. And so the experience you're having of life is perceiving that all of these things are happening to you.
Hmm.
Um, but what's really happening is you're having an experience of life that you're translating into negative things. And to me, that simple little line from the book was the only helpful thing to help you see that for yourself. And we've talked about this, like from a coach perspective, that's my job, is for you to see something that maybe I'm seeing from the outside. You've got to see it for yourself before anything's going to fundamentally change. And so that invitation that we're not our thoughts, we're the ones observing it, was just pointing you in that direction to say, if you held on to this as you go through the next few weeks of your life, see what comes up, right?
Hmm.
And see how this, and you definitely were not buying into it, because I think you were patterned in a way to believe the thoughts you were having and believe the emotions you were having, like that those were like you wanted to be validated that they were right, they were true.
Mm.
You deserve to feel this way, because
Yeah. Don't you
how dare
see?
people do this, right?
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
exactly.
yeah, exactly, right. And so that was hard to let go of, and you and I have talked about, this video that I love, of somebody that was challenged to give up some of those thought patterns, and his reaction from one of absolute despair was like this joyful laughter. He goes, "Oh, that means I'm going to have to write a new script."
Hmm.
And
Yes.
that's one of my favorite lines of coaching that I've ever heard somebody say, because it's like, we live by these scripts of our thought patterns, and even the negative ones, even the worst negative script somehow feels safer than giving it up and having to live by a new one that's full of possibility and full of accountability, especially, right? And I
Mm-hmm.
think that's really, really hard for people. Is you can being a victim can feel a lot safer than feeling like I'm empowered to do whatever I want. And so a lot of people will stay in a victim mode for a long, long time, because that story is one that they know. They told it to themselves and other people over and over and over again, and allows them to be who they are, or the way they are, with sort of a rationale for why it is. And but the reality is there's a beautiful human being inside there somewhere who can be so much more than that. And
Hmm.
that took a while. It definitely took a while, and it took, I think probably there was, as with sort of what I observed, there was a number of areas in your life that needed to be unwound, sort of one at a time, to
Hmm.
start to believe that this was actually something you might be able to believe in, you needed to see evidence. And so it wasn't like the first time you tried it, oh yeah, now I see it, I can wipe out all the rest of the stories. And it was like one thing at a time before you started to get some momentum. That's my recollection.
Yeah, I love that you said so this was all like the area that we're talking about in our work together was before I went to England, right? So
Mhm. Yeah,
so because we started working together in 2021, and at that point what I was wishing to do was to be a better coach, was basically to improve
yeah.
as a coach and to go from the sort of coach who's almost a consultant. Because what I used to do is when someone would ask me a question, I would answer it.
Yeah.
And I was already opening up a little bit to the idea of like, A, that doesn't work because it's not helping them choose something for themselves or try something for themselves that they came up with. And thus, if it's effective, it was self-motivated and thus will sort of stick. You know what I mean? They'll be like just in sort of on a higher coaching level. Like uh there was I don't remember. Oh, I do remember. His name is Michael Bungay Stanier,
Mm.
something like that. He wrote a book which is about, I think it's about 5 coaching questions, but there's one of them and you could that anyone could use. He talks about like people in corporate, like leaders of any stripe could use this. And the question that stuck with me that I started using just before you and I met at Rich Litvin's 2021 coaching intensive was, what is the real challenge here for you? And I remember when I would ask that of people, like sometimes I would even ask that of people in my life, and they would just stop and go, what an interest, like, let me think about that. And so I was already starting to kind of open to that. And then our like long before there was any sort of like awareness or I am not my thoughts kind of like work was, I want to be a better coach. Like I want to be able to serve people
Mhm.
better, like to be able to generate income from my coaching, etc. And then when I feel like what happened with that was I started to be able to do it. I was getting more and more successful at it. It was fun. And then there was this, what I wanted to start working on then was like, well, I thought of it as losing weight, right? I wanted to be lighter.
Mhm.
And like that's where I thought this was going to go. I will just be lighter. I will lose weight and be lighter. So that was about a year before I went to England and did this hike. And so the time that we're kind of talking about is like between the beginning of that work and getting on the plane to go to England. And I can remember, if I look back, a lot of the conversations or messaging that we would have were really about this idea that I just wasn't getting, right? This I am not my thoughts idea.
Mhm.
And then there came a moment in uh, February of 2023 where I considered taking my life. I think we've talked about that a little bit because I was afraid. I was afraid that I wouldn't be able to do this thing that I really wanted to do. A lot of victim thoughts about like who has permission to take the money, and invest it in this, who has the time, like that I didn't feel empowered to do that. And I remember the night that I was thinking about taking my life, the conversation that, or the messaging that we had, you helped me, come up with a question to ask that needed to be asked that would mean that I was helping understand, well, I was understanding what someone else's needs in my life were while I was also doing, or taking the steps to do this track that I really wanted to do and sort of claim good things in my life. But so once I'd sort of stepped off of the cliff, or come back from thinking about suicide, we continued to talk a little bit more, and what you said was something like, this is not about what you think it's about. Like that's a bit of a higher level of, without describing the whole conversation. And you said, you think it's about this, but it's really about this. Like that's going to be the result that you get when you have resolved this. And the quote, this was about recognizing what in here is pulling me which direction, and how to not just go with that, with what felt like a default, but instead to take a moment and breathe and choose. And I remember having the thought, I felt like Helen Keller, like Helen Keller, I'm sure, people are familiar with this story. When she was a little girl, she became ill, and she ended up losing the ability to see and hear. And then she was like a wild, insane child that no one could connect with for, years, until someone came into her life who taught her a kind of sign language that she could feel with her hands. And, there's a very famous sort of moment in her life where her teacher's name is Annie. And they're because they lived, before there was they lived in a time with like water pumps, right? So people still had to pump water from a well. And the water's running over Helen's hand, and Annie is using the letters WATER in her other hand. And there's a moment where Helen goes, wait a minute, that's water? Like, that is this? And I just remember that feeling so vividly of like, I had no idea what I was missing.
Mhm.
And now I do, right? And I think what's interesting about that is, like you're talking about, we sort of unswirled it for one layer, and then there were other layers. So by the time we got to the point where you said, my memory is that like probably in April, or that was in like February. This is, a couple months later, you said something like, you must take on others' pain, because there's no way that this can all be coming from your body, yourself. And I remember being like, damn, like he's right. And that was another layer of it. And I even remember on the trek being able, like, there was a day on the trek where I discovered pretty early on that the train that I had thought that I'd paid for, that was meant to take me from Robin Hood's Bay approximately to London, was canceled. Like, the train was just canceled. There was a strike, there were things going on.
Happens in the UK a lot.
Yeah. And I, like, every morning from that point, I would get up and I'd be like, okay, are you going to worry about this? You can't do anything about it right now. Are you going to worry about this? Or are you going to go out on your walk today? And I felt so grateful that I had the walk to take me away from those thoughts. And after the trek, I still had, moments where I wouldn't realize that I was caught up in my thoughts. And yet I still was. So, like, this definitely, it has been such a, like, I think it's really interesting that it can be experienced so differently, that it takes years for one person to sort of really make it my operating system, and a split second for someone else to do the same.
Yeah. Yeah, and I can't explain that, and I've said that many times, that I don't know why. It was just obvious to me in the moment that this made a lot more sense as a way to experience life,
Mhm.
than the way I had been living. So yeah, and there a little bit of of that sort of narrative of what you shared there. As a coach, especially in some of these, in a high stakes moment, it's really important that sometimes, and I'm not suggesting that coaches should be playing this role in some of these situations if that's what they find themselves in. But in the moment, the only thing that occurred to me was, we have to interrupt the pattern that's happening in this moment, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that has to often, and that's a very helpful approach, is that people, and in coaching, we're taught to listen and sit back and be with our clients and take in everything. But sometimes you have to interrupt the thought pattern that they're in, and in a way that is quite stark and quite jarring sometimes for them, because they've trained themselves to keep repeating these stories and these loops of what's gotten them to this stage, that if we just keep letting it, happen, anything that is said after that is really not going to have any consequence, because they've just rehearsed again the story that justifies where they're at in this moment. And so, as a coach, sometimes it is like breaking all the coaching rules and saying, stop,
Mhm. Yeah.
like we need to explore what's actually going on here. And I don't know, like as a coach, you don't really know where your own intuition comes from of when that moment is or what the right approach is. But, I think a lot of what we've done along the way has been, it's true. Like you still have had emotional ups and downs even since through all of this. But what's changed, and what I try to really reinforce to the people that I help as much as possible, is the gift is to actually go from not knowing or not noticing at all to noticing, right?
Yep.
Even if the noticing is only happening because you're noticing on the back of an emotional response that you're having,
Yep.
we have to celebrate that you're now noticing that before you start spiraling with it. And that's the biggest thing I would say, your journey has been, is the length of time that you spend in an emotional or thought pattern has gone from, I don't know, weeks or months or years
Yep.
before we met,
Yep.
to like a matter of seconds and minutes now.
Yeah.
Even you've just gone through what for a lot of parents is a traumatic time of your two sons like moving out of the house, right? For the first time in your
Yep.
life.
Yep.
And you were quite emotional for about 12 hours or so, 18 hours. And then you're like, huh, this is not so bad.
Yeah.
This is different, right? It's not that you don't miss them. It's not that you're not, that you're not, having a parental response to it. But the amount of time that you were in that little thought pattern was so short. It was really fun to watch that. And even during the hike, the days when you felt like your feet couldn't take another step, it was just, by the time the next morning rolled around, those thoughts, you had found a way to let them pass by and wake up and do what you needed to do and keep on going. And so that's been the fun thing as an observer of your journey, is to see that it's not that we stop having this experience of thoughts and emotions in our life. It's just that we spend a lot less time getting controlled by them. And then we choose the default that we want to live in. And you'll remember that one of the very first things we introduced to your routine was the state of feeling you wanted to be in every day, because that then became the compass or the guide of when you're off that your choice is, how do I get back to that feeling that I want to be in today?
Yeah.
Right. And you'll remember the exact words, I'm sure.
Joyful, patient serenity then, joyful, patient presence now.
Right.
Yeah.
So anytime you notice that you're in an emotional state of some sort, it's easy to come back, or the invitation is to come back to that joyful, serene state by recognizing that you don't need to do anything with those thoughts that are trying to take you away.
Yeah. I love that you bring up the the choice, like and I think the way that's the way I think about that, and even sometimes the way that I'll talk about it as a coach, is that emotions are information. Like this is input, it's information, it's something that you can observe and see. And because especially with the experience of being uh you know um a woman with like my husband and our two boys, right? Not super thrilled with lots of emotion, right? And so I used to sort of feel like it would absolutely wreck them if I cried, and they're so comfortable with it now because like I can say to them, these are happy tears, or I am going through something and it's okay. Like this is, I understand this as information. It's not something that anybody needs to do anything about. It's just something to sit with. And it's funny that day that, so we've now been living without our sons for two nights. I think this will be the third night. So, and there there are moments where I feel a little sad about that, but I can go, oh, okay, that's information. And the Monday, so Sunday night was the first night without them. On Monday afternoon and evening, something happened that really knocked me that had nothing to do with them. And I remember, I think you'd be so proud of me, just personally, Andrew, because it took me about 15 minutes
Mhm.
to remember the question, what in me is disturbed by this? And as soon as I remembered it, I was like, oh yeah, I can honor this little girl, and I can know that the person who said this has their reasons. Like it just takes the emotion out of it. You know what I mean? You can see from a different perspective. You can understand that there are different ways to look at this and receive it, and that the choice is yours,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah, I mean that question could be a tool of its own, to be honest, because in a lot of ways it's kind of the same idea. I mean, it comes from the same book as well, which
Mm,
is like what in me is being disturbed by this suggests that you can actually observe that about yourself from outside of yourself. You can observe what it is that's being disturbed as an observer of that, and be curious about it, because our reaction to things, how we emotionally react and respond to them, is based on some learned and trained behavior that we've, you know, it's part of who we've become to that point. But it doesn't mean that it's there for good. It's just like, well, what if we took that out and stopped having that, whatever, is it a belief, or is it a story? Is it a victimhood? Is it whatever? If that's no longer part of our operating system, then those external inputs will no longer create the same reaction.
mhm,
Yeah. I also want to say that I think it was really interesting, and I do remember now that, like, there's something about this understanding of where we are not our thoughts, we're the ones observing them, that releases our need to fix everything that we experience in life, every thought, every emotion, right? Um, it's just a realization that, okay, well, actually those thoughts, or that are causing these emotions, or this way I'm feeling right now, are not something I need to actually do anything with. They're
mhm,
just happening, and they're just like, a lot of people talk them like they're clouds floating by in the sky, where if you just wait a little bit, that cloud's going to go on by, and you'll be, dealing with whatever the new reality is. And there's something about recognizing that I don't need to fix this in our own experience, that also can be a great reminder that we also don't need to fix it in other people either. Like, it's also,
yeah.
they get to have the experience of learning this for themselves. And I think that's a hard thing. And I seem to recall there might have been some moments where your awareness of your own, and your growth, actually created almost like a contrast to the other people in your life who were not on the same journey quite yet of
Mhm,
self-awareness and consciousness and awareness of thought. And they were still reacting to life that was happening. And you were observing them having this experience of life. And it almost created a little bit more frustration, like how do I help them? How do I fix that? And
mhm,
this is the hard thing in our lives, is that until other people are invited to learn this or experience this for themselves, and I don't say this in any kind of a judgmental way, but until you've taken this understanding, applied it to yourself, learned where you still have thorns, or you still have parts of you that get disrupted by things that happen, I've met people who've got this understanding, but there's a couple of things in their life that still, if they happen, they go way spiraling down with those
Mm.
things. And so, and even we've talked about, my experience on the boat. There was things that I learned about myself on the boat because I got around a different kind of people, right? In a different environment. And so all of a sudden there was inputs that I was not used to having, that all of a sudden I noticed, like, oh wow, that triggers something in me. Like,
Mm.
what's that about? But but then I reminded myself, like, good on you for noticing, right? Like, you didn't punch the guy back. You were like, oh, yeah, well, he's a 30-year-old Italian. That's what 30-year-old Italians do, right? And so,
Mhm.
and what is it in me that's bothered by that, right? And I started to learn to actually appreciate that people's personalities and differences and ways of being were only about them. It had nothing to do with me, and I just could be the observer of all that. But I needed, there was a couple of reminders along the way to test that in me. And
Mm.
I think that's true for all of us. Like, I don't think there's any spiritual being out there that goes along perfectly in life and isn't from time to time nudged by, the experience of life still and into some new areas of discomfort. But, I said to a coaching client this week that, the best thing you can do is to celebrate yourself for being the noticer of these things, and not to be not to put judgment against yourself for the fact that you have these responses, or you have these emotions, or that you have these thoughts. It's let's celebrate that you're having them, and then you have a choice of what you do with them. And that's really important, because I think you can become very self-aware, but be very harsh about that
Mm.
towards yourself. And that's not a helpful place to be. It's
Mm.
it's a place to really love the process of growing and being aware and taking more and more agency over how you live your life, and more choice in the way you want to feel every day. I love the idea of living your life in a consciously chosen feeling every day. And,
Mhm.
like, I think that's probably the homework that we're going to talk about at the end, is like, when I do that every morning in my little journal, is I write down the affirmation around the emotional state I want for today.
Mm.
And it's not always the same, because each day sometimes demands a little bit of a different approach in terms of what's the state that I want to be in that will also serve what's ahead of me today. What I know at least is ahead of me today. The unknown parts, who knows? But it's always based in some level of presence and calmness and peace with my own state, like my own experience of life, so that, if it's a meeting with coworkers, or if it's going and doing an interview with somebody, or whatever it is, going to the bank, dealing with taxes, it's what's the best place for me to come from today to deal with what's ahead of me. And when you learn that and you are intentional about that, it's a beautiful way to live your life. And then when you notice getting pulled out of it, to come back to that. Yeah, it changes everything.
Yeah. I'm glad that you shared a little bit about the boat, your experience. So for folks who don't know this, Andrew spent about a year sailing around the world in a sailing race, circumnavigating the globe in a sailing race. And um, I was really curious about, like, did the thoughts get louder? Like, were there things that or did your inner, whatever, uh, inner landscape change at all on the boat?
Yeah. Yeah, I think, and we talked about this a little bit in the conversations we had along the way, that I definitely noticed early on that the environment in the boat of 18 to 20 new people that I didn't know before was a very different experience of life than what I had crafted for myself in my day-to-day life before getting on the boat. I realized that my sense that of being at peace and calmness and presence sort of in my life did have a lot to do with the fact that I had crafted a life that was fairly simple and had limited, internal or limited inputs from the external inputs that were big surprises to me, right? Or were out of my norm. I had crafted sort of a very stable sort of experience of life, even though we were traveling, went to Europe, went to Costa Rica, did a bunch of things. But even in those settings, it was never panicked. It was never like it was very intentionally simple and embracing the simplicity and embracing choosing what we decide to do each day, not feeling over programmed. Like there was conscious thoughts to have our environment be one that supported being in this peaceful, calm state. Well, the boat was anything but that. The boat was 20 new people, 20 different personalities, and also 20 people all pretty much exhausted, wet, cold, or super hot, depending on where we were on the planet, hungry or fed up of eating the same food every day, weeks, 3-4 weeks at a time away from family and loved ones, and, going through what sailing the oceans is all about, which is, a lot of unknowns and a lot of, a mix of chaos and utter boredom, all mixed together. And so it was kind of fun because, well, no, it was a lot of fun. It was like going into a new amusement park where there's like all these rides you've never seen before. And it's like, how am I going to react to this ride? And how am I going to react to that ride? And there's all these different people who are different than the ones normally at the amusement park I go to. It's like, how am I going to respond when, to how they are interacting with me? And it was always like that on the boat. There was just like how other people are responding to this situation we're in you were always being confronted by that. And you couldn't really escape it because there's nowhere to go. So it was a great test. And I think it really deepened my own commitment to this and my own understanding of this, but also my own appreciation of that you don't need to build a life where you kind of cocoon yourself away from, things that are disruptive to you or different from how you normally would live your life. If you go into it with an appreciation that there will be some things here that will expose new opportunities for growth and new areas that you're going to react to because you've never really had to deal with them before. And actually, I found that really empowering as I went through the experience to learn more about myself and learn more about the kinds of things that I could grow from. And I think it's made me I know it's made me a much better person as a result. So it was for all of what came of it, I think that's probably one of the greatest gifts that it gave me was this better sense of myself and better sense of also my ability to exist in life within an environment that's much more challenging and much more disruptive than the one I would naturally choose beforehand.
Wow. Thank you. That is really just so cool to hear those reflections, and to hear your understanding of yourself and how that shifted over that year and moved into where you are now.
It is the gift of this tool is if you can, and you don't have to go sail around the world to learn this. Please don't. It's not for everybody. But if you can see how you have learned from this, and I think you're a great example of this, Kay, is that the Kay that I met at the start would never have been as adventurous and willing to try new things as the version we have today. You know, your willingness to just walk up to people and you know, ask for what you want, or invite them for a conversation, or try a new thing for your coaching practice or your art or whatever, has come about because you've learned that you can handle new situations and new circumstances, even if they don't pan out the way you thought they might. You know now that whatever happens, I know that even if I have a reaction to it, I know kind of what to do about that, which is nothing. I don't need to, right? And so it really is permission to start living your life with, and the only thing that we really need to know is that we can handle what's going to happen, because we know that what's going to happen is in our response to it is 100% on us. What's going to happen is going to happen, but what we do about it is always going to be our choice. And so that gives you tremendous freedom. You can call it courage, you can call it freedom, you can call it, you know, guts, you can call it whatever you want, but really it comes from an understanding that whatever happens, I'm going to be able to navigate it, because I'm not going to get caught up in the emotions of that thing.
Yeah.
And that if when you get to that point, you become this sort of like creative genius all of a sudden that was always in you, but it was always hidden behind the fear of what might happen, as if you didn't have the ability to deal with what might happen. Now you know you can deal with what might happen, and you're excited to find out what might happen. And it's a beautiful shift.
Yeah, it makes for a much more fun existence. Just before we get to the homework, what's coming up is this. So I every year complete a fun little booklet called Year Compass. And at the end of so what you do is you reflect back on the year that's just passed, and you sort of create, or you envision, you dream about the year that's to come. And at the end of 23, so I was looking back on 23. No, yes, this was when I had this experience. I was looking back on 23 and looking out to 24. And I read what I had written at the end of 22 about one particular thing. So one thing that I had said at the end of 22 that I completely forgot about until we got a year later was that I wished to have a bigger community, that I wished to expand my community. Like, and I think I had a wish to just sort of be connected with more people, because I was discovering at the end of 22 that people were pretty darned amazing, and, you know, that there's a lot of good in the world. And so I wrote that, forgot about it, whatever. Now it's the end of 23. And when I get to the same question, when I get to a reflection on the past year, what I wrote was, the universe is my community. And then I went back and read what I'd written in 22 about wishing to expand my community. And I was like, well, I guess I did that. And this is the mechanism. It is understanding that whatever happens, I can pause. I can choose my action, even if it is not an action. I can stop and go, okay, like, people really, what I have found is that people really respond to that place. They're not expecting it. They're not expecting someone to not, you know, it really does create an opening. And that is really lovely. Like that, I think that's been such fun, you know?
Yeah. It is a little unnerving for people who live in a very reactive way, to have somebody not react and even take a moment to pause or take a breath and come back with something that's in a completely different energy to the thing that was offered. And but it's a very powerful way to disarm a lot of situations that could go in not a very positive direction, is to choose your reaction to things, right? You know, like I've shared, like, that people lash out at you over something that's based on like their own anger that's in them. Well, if you lash out with anger back at them, that's not going to solve the problem. You're just adding more fuel to their fire. If you can pause and just be curious about and empathetic about what might be going on for them, you diffuse the energy of that situation right away.
Yeah.
And that person will their energy will get directed some in a different direction. And I think it's one of our mutual friend Mara Olson Gleason Olson wrote a beautiful little book, One Thought, and she talks about this moment when she was basically accosted in a alleyway in Argentina by somebody who basically had a knife and was trying to rob her at the very least. And she recounts this, her ability to be conscious of the thoughts and the emotions she was having, and to just let them be and let them go, and just come from this place of love and care and for this person of what they might be dealing with. And this person, she, like the way I recall that she recounted it, was like it disarmed him.
Mm-hmm.
Like he became disarmed from the energy that he was bringing to it by how she reacted to it.
Wow.
And it's fascinating. And there's a lot of things about these topics that we're talking about and I think this actually goes back to sort of do you need to know why this is true, or can you accept that this makes life easier to live with, and is that enough evidence to say, I'm going to go with that plan? Or do you need it proven? Do you need the neuroscience,
the evidence-based studies?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. And that's for everybody to decide for themselves. But I think the invitation is to experience this and to try this and to choose this. Right? Maybe this is the segue to the homework, but this is not a necessarily explainable thing for a lot of people until they've had their own experience of it.
The feeling
it's hard
of it.
to explain it to somebody of why this works, even though we're trying to do that today. What we're really doing today is explaining how it's affected each of us in our own way, and how we've used this and inserted it into different situations, from sailing around the world to walking across England to living our day-to-day lives. This one little thought, this one little understanding is a new way of approaching how we live our life.
Yeah. And I feel like it's important to say this too, that trying it or being open to the experience of it, it'll be so interesting. It would be so interesting to hear how that shifts something for somebody. And it's not similar to Mara, because there was no knives and it was not anything like that. But on my trek, I took a bus ride. There was a double-decker domed bus that that was the bus route to go from where I was staying in this place called Sea Toller to the market town. And I was like, are you kidding me? I get to ride on a double-decker domed bus. And on the way there, I was the only person up top. It was raining, so I was under the dome. I was like face pressed right up against it. It was awesome. And on the way back, these two guys got on the bus, and they came upstairs and they sat as close to me, it felt like, as they possibly could, because they also wanted the experience of being right up there, right? And now I'm hearing booze clinking and they're drinking from, beer bottles. And I was like, part of my brain that I could see was like, oh, like, I won't swear, but oh my goodness, what is this? And, I'm a person who's had some things happen that could reference triggering, right? And I just turned to them and started talking. Like, I just said, like, hello, like, and I was curious about them, and not that there was any need to, quote, disarm, but if I had turned to them in an energy of like, you're too close, back off, man, or any other sort of suspicious or, the thoughts, if I'd sort of given way to those, it would have been a very, very different experience.
Yeah.
And as it was one of the most pleasant memories that I have. Like, we had a really good time up there at the top, in front of the dome bus. So
there you go. Choosing your experience of life.
Yeah. Yeah. So what are you thinking for homework this time? What are we introducing or, inviting people into?
Well, again, I always, base this off of, what's worked for me, and only as a starting place for people to sort of figure this out for themselves. But I guess in this case specifically, it's what's worked for both of us, because, it's a similar invitation to the one that I gave to you, which is like, if you could actually sit with yourself and think about the way you would like to feel as you start out your day, and what it would feel like to be able to live a day of your life in a in an ideal state, in a state that feels like if I could live my life feeling this way, this would be awesome. Um, and to actually think about that with some and give it some proper thought and consideration. And the words need to be words that actually resonate for you. They may be words that other people would have a different interpretation of, but whatever those words are for you about the state and that feeling state that you want to live in, is to be intentional to choose those, and then set up a pattern where every morning you have a way that you remind yourself of that before early in the day, before the day starts to unfold. Because when the day starts to unfold, that will become your midline to come back to, right? If you get drawn into something and you notice that you're being drawn into it, that will be your invitation to come back to this feeling state. And I think that, which it sounds simple, but having the reference point of how you want to feel every day, and then becoming conscious of the times when you're getting drawn out of that, that's really the journey we've been talking about in this conversation, is the awareness that, oh, yes, I'm in a thought or I'm in an emotion right now. And a recognition that that's not me. It's just where my thoughts have led me.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to choose to leave those thoughts over there, and I'm going to come back to this feeling state that is my preferred state. So that would be the invitation. That's a habit that anybody that listens to this can try and implement for themselves. They can choose their own words. They can choose what that means to them, and then they can just start becoming a little bit more aware of the times that they're being drawn out of that, and to do what, a good deep breath, a good chuckle to yourself, a good, reminder that, oh yeah, that's one of those thoughts that they were talking about in that video I watched. I can leave that alone and come back to where I started from today. And it would be fun, as you said, to invite people to share, even if it's just one moment that they had when they recognized this was going on and they found themselves able to just let something go and come back to their preferred state. It'd be fun to hear some examples of how that's happened, because
Yeah.
it can happen in the craziest places, whether it's some parents got a screaming kid on the floor of the grocery store, or somebody cuts you off in traffic, or your spouse forgets to do something, or whatever.
Yep.
We all react to different things in different ways. And so starting to notice that, it can be quite funny to see the little triggers that we have in us, and to be curious about where on earth have those come from.
Yeah.
And then just to lay them down.
Oh. Yeah. So it sounds like it's a bit of a two-part for you, where it's
Two-parter,
like,
yeah.
let's envision the state that we wish, and then let's notice when we're not in that state.
Yeah.
Basically. Oh, I love
Yeah.
that.
And invite yourself to come back to where you want to be.
Yes. Yeah. I think I'm gonna build off of that, because there's a practice that I've been doing that I heard about first on a wonderful podcast, which is called First This. And the podcast episode, it's 10 minutes of mindfulness and meditation. And there's one called Watchword. And as you're stirring your coffee in the morning, this is what she invites. I do it a little bit differently, but this is what she invites is, as you're stirring your coffee in the morning, just like bring up a word, right? So perhaps it's a word or a phrase that someone has already envisioned, and now they're stirring their coffee, and you say it out loud, and you notice it throughout. Because what happens is, if I say joyful patient presence, for example, and those are my watchwords, I really, and they're not always, but whatever it is, I notice it. If it's calm, if it's sometimes playful, sometimes, right? That's what I see. That's what
Mhm.
my brain, like what I'm doing is I'm telling my brain what to point towards.
That's right.
And and that is really fun. So yeah, I just like you, I'd love if you're doing this, let us know, right? Let us know. So cool. Well, thank you so much. Those of you who are listening, who've joined in to watch, appreciate you being here. I've noticed that one of the things that isn't happening is because we're surprising. I decided today that this was the tool.
Hmm.
So what that means though is I'm not putting anything out beforehand that says, "Hey, this is the tool we're going to be doing."
Yeah.
Um, so maybe what I will do is just invite questions retrospectively. So if somebody's got questions or if you want to share about your feeling state and what that's been like to sort of be in and out of, please do so. And I'm looking forward to hearing about that. So yeah, and thank you, Andrew, for another just great conversation. One of our
Mhm.
listeners called it rich the last time, a very rich conversation, and I love that.
Yeah, well, it's always fun to explore the human experience, right? And just try to make sense of it all. And I think I would assume everybody that listens to these picks up something different or responds to something a little different based on their own understanding of their own experience of life. And that's part of the journey, right? These are tools that we know that even young children can learn these things, and when they're empowered with this understanding, can seriously impact the trajectory of their lives. And so, just a lot of us are coming to these things at different stages of our life, and seeing the power of it. And it's exciting to be able to share it, and to be able to share it in a practical way, to talk about how this has been applied to different circumstances and experiences of life, as we've done for both of our stories. So I hope it brings value. I hope it is a rich conversation for people, and hopefully, most importantly, that people find something that they can take away and try to implement for themselves, or try to apply to their own situation.
Yeah, yeah, I love that.
Yeah, cool.
Well said. All
Well,
right. Well, thank you.
thank you.
Uh,
Appreciate it.
yeah, we'll see you next time,
Okay. Bye-bye.
everybody. Bye bye.